Hi everybody, this is a channel all about adoption and fostering childhood trauma. Today we're going to talk about life story work. There's two different ways of looking at this. There's life story work as in what you've been given potentially as an adopter or even a foster carer, but normally an adopter, where you get a file or a booklet and that has the child's history and story in. And then there's life story work that you just do, generally speaking, when you talk to your child about their history and their story. So we're going to kind of cover both today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how my boys have come to me with different things. So first of all, the types of questions that I've had and therefore you might get are, what do my family look like? Because we never had a lot of information around what the family actually looked like, and where are they now, what are they doing now. When it comes to siblings that perhaps they don't see anymore, what are the siblings doing, what type of home did they come from, did they have pets? I mean, it's all the sorts of general questions. It's nothing kind of that complicated that I've been asked by them. So sometimes what happens is when you show the official life story book to your child, or start talking to a younger child using the life story work that's been put together, you may find that it's still too difficult for them to understand. So if you've got a child that's 5 or under, definitely. If you've got a child who's 8 or under, probably still too difficult to understand. So when I started sharing my life story, they come in like ring binders like this, like ring binders, and they're laminated. That's what I have anyway for the boys. When I started flipping through and telling them what was in there, so it would have things like, this is what you weighed when you were born, this is where you were born, you know, this is the hospital you were born at. And it went through things like, this is the problems that your mum had, this is the problems that your dad had, and this is really why they couldn't look after you. So it was quite detailed in the sense that it did go through the issues and problems that the family had and why the child couldn't be there. So it's quite in-depth in that way, but it was worded in a way that a child could understand. However, although the wording was worded in a way a child could understand, the concepts were too difficult for my boys to understand. And that was only really, I'd say, a few years ago when they were about 9 and 10. So that presents a problem in a way, because you can't just read through this file and go, job done. I've shared the life story with them. They now know where they've come from, what happened and why they're with me. It's not really going to cut to the chase. And so when it comes to simple questions about why they're with you and why the family couldn't look after them, I think for me what I found the most useful was to use 3D figurines to do that in whatever way you can. So whether that is a set of teddies or dolls, I find that is really good with early years, and you can kind of describe to them what's happened. The most important thing is not to avoid doing this. So even though it's really difficult and you may find it very challenging, if you can be open with your adopted child, or if you've got a child that you're fostering from the beginning about why they aren't with their family, then definitely do that and do it in simple terms. So you will probably be told by a social worker to say something like, mum or dad or daddy or mummy could not look after you. They weren't able to look after you because they had problems themselves, or they weren't able to care for you to keep you safe. Probably give you that terminology, but often that's not really enough. I don't think it's not really enough to satisfy the curiosity, because if you say to the child, your mummy and daddy couldn't keep you safe, if you look at that in pure layman's terms, that's kind of like literally safety, and a child doesn't necessarily associate safety in the way that we might be describing it when it's talking about being at home with a family that is neglectful or abusive. They're thinking sometimes like, I've fallen over and I cut my leg type of safe, or they're thinking different. For example, then, if a child says to you, where is my mummy, and you know that the mum is not in a good place, or you know that the mum has still got the issues that they had before, then you could say something like, well, your mum is safe, because this is the other thing as well, that even if it's been a really abusive background or neglectful, or even if the child has actually come away from the situation, excuse the son by the way, come away from the situation quite young, they will still want to know in a way that that family are safe and they're okay. That doesn't mean to say they necessarily want to see them, but they still want to know that they are safe and okay for the most part. So one of my sons does want to know that, I think, and the other one probably does not want to know anything about them. So it does depend. But they want to know that they're safe. They probably want to know that they're not necessarily going to be found by the birth family if there is a lot of fear around that. So if they are asking where they live, then you need to be careful to say, well, if you don't know where they live, well, I don't know where they live, but I'm pretty sure they don't live anywhere near us. You might need to say that. Or I know where they live, but you're at a safe distance from them. Or I know where they live and they're safe and well, but we're not going to be seeing them. Children, sometimes when they're younger and they've not been in care for very long, or they've not been with you for very long, they don't actually want to know that they could be found. Other children or teenagers might actually want to know that their family are safe and well, and that they're not living a million miles away, so that at some point they can actually keep contact with them. When it comes to things like, if you know that the family have had very difficult times, like there's alcohol involved or drugs involved, or there could be severe violence, domestic violence, then you're going to have to find the words to describe the way that they live just not being suitable to bring up children into. So you can't describe drugs and alcohol to a child that's very young, and even under the age of 8, it's really hard to actually describe what it really is, because then you find that if you're having a pleasant drink or something, or just you use the word drug in any other context, the child gets really confused. So you could just say that the way that your mum or dad was living was not a way that could be suitable for children to be in that home, so that they may not have found that they had enough money or time, or that they were concentrating on things that children need to have. So they couldn't concentrate on giving you enough food or meals. They couldn't concentrate on being there to put you to bed or giving you clean clothes, because they weren't that well themselves. And yes, you may get more questions around, well, what do you mean not well? And then you might have to be a little bit more detailed and say, well, they were maybe having things or taking things that were making them feel unwell. But you can normally get away with just describing in the beginning that they just weren't well enough to cope with bringing up a child. So then, of course, you need to make sure that the child knows that they were loved. So even if you know that there were so many things in the house that were very not conducive to being in a loving environment, you still need to make sure that the child knows that they were loved, that it wasn't that they were rejected. It was just that the mum or the dad or both or whatever were not able to have a home that was, you can use the word safe if you like, but I think it's easier to say, could not have a home that was good for bringing up children in. So therefore you couldn't stay, rather than they didn't want you, or they or that they couldn't look after them, of course. But I think you need to be more, look at it from a slightly more positive slant, that it just wasn't good enough for children to be in, and therefore it wasn't good enough for you to be in, and you deserve the best. You deserve to have clean clothes, a bed at night, not to be listening to arguing and shouting. And the life story will go through all of that. Actually, it's quite interesting how much detail is in there, even if it's put across in a child's terms. They will, if there was domestic violence, they will mention in there that as a child you would have heard loads of shouting and it would have been really upsetting for you, and that they will say if the mum and dad didn't get on, that they didn't get on very well. It will say all of that. So you can sort of use the book as a guide, and maybe show them a few pictures if they can tolerate it, but then you can break it down into children's words and terms, and just be prepared to take a while to speak to them, because we spent hours with our children. Also, of course, you've got to be prepared for a little bit of fallout when you're sharing. At times we've thought the children are all right when we've been sharing things with them, and because we've got letterbox contact, we've then had later photos and things sent to us, and they seem to be okay at the time, but then the next day or two you do get that restless kind of insecurity around it, because it just brings up so many unanswered questions for them. It probably brings up more questions than it does answers. But the most important thing overall is to keep that dialogue going, however hard it is for you. And if you don't know the answer to something, because I know sometimes the boys have asked me things and I don't know, I don't know the answers. And so I'll say, I actually don't know the answer to that. I've also always said to them that if they ever want to see any member of the family, that I would try and facilitate that for them if I felt they were in a strong enough place to do that. I mean, that's not how I say it to the kids, but if I say, if I think that you can manage the situation, I would never stop you from seeing them. And they always need to know that that connection back to that birth family is a possibility if they want it, even if they don't want it, because it's just a natural thing to be curious about what your original family looks like, what they're doing now, how they function, and how that might be different from what we're doing now and how we function, because it is their grassroots. No matter what, it is their grassroots, and we cannot erase the fact that they've had that original family. You can't erase what they've come from, and it's best not to, because then what they do is they can build up a timeline for themselves, especially as they get older. They can build up a timeline of events and things and start placing them into, their minds. Another important reason why you need to share as much detail as you feel that your child can tolerate is because sometimes children make up things, or they think things have happened to them, or their memory serves them wrong in a way, because they remember elements of what happened to them and then they'll make up the rest of the story alongside, because they want to fill in the gaps. And so you might end up with a life story that they put together which is not at all true, and is quite a long way from the truth. And then if they tell that often enough to themselves, then that becomes their life story. So it's really important at different stages as well of the child's development to keep going back and reminding them of the actual factual information, so that you don't find that they're popping in their own little bits of information as well. So apologise for the light, by the way, but I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, please subscribe to Fly Little Birds. I will link a playlist at the end on childhood trauma so that you can have a little look at some of the extra videos I've made. Thank you for joining me.